Hello and welcome to this presentation where I shall attempt to answer some of the practitioners' questions. My name is Howard Garlick and I am one of the technical and certification engineers at the British Institute of Non-Destructive Testing. In this video I have the pleasure of answering some questions provided through the Practitioners Committee. The response to these questions was originally provided during the 2025 Certification Conference in Edinburgh. A common and reasonable query is why both the AQBs and PCN have a maximum 28-day turnaround on examination results. I appreciate the grounds for this query, as on face value this does appear to be a lengthy period of time. However, it is the maximum, with the vast majority of examination results and the issuance of certification usually being much quicker. Firstly, we will look at factors that may affect the AQB's turnaround. Here I'm in the fortunate position to pass on my own experience as an examiner, having held the role in 2 AQBs. Examiners must hold certification in the relevant method, sector and technique. That potentially equates to more than 18 Level 3 certificates. With that in mind, AQBs will have numerous examiners to cover the wide scope of certifications required. While the AQBs will have a designated chief examiner and perhaps a deputy chief examiner, other members of staff are often relied upon to supplement this provision. These other members of staff are usually employed as trainers or consultants, which limits their availability to mark examinations upon immediate completion. Next, we have marking for AECs. At the time of writing these notes, the PCN scheme has 22 AQBs and 32 AECs. An AQB is an authorised qualifying body, meaning that the centre is approved to mark PCN examinations. An AEC is an authorised examination centre. Examinations taken at these centres are then passed on to whichever AQB that particular AEC is in partnership with. Ultimately, this means that examinations taken at AECs will exhibit a small delay in examinations being passed on to the controlling AQB. The communication is often digital, so I must emphasise that this is usually a very small loss in time. The AQB perhaps has the more difficult job in managing its own workload, as examinations must be marked in date order, ensuring there is no bias in turnaround. This may mean that the AQB receives a large number of examinations from external AECs at short notice and may be required to mark those examinations first if the AEC's examinations took place earlier than the AQB's own examinations. The final and perhaps most significant factor is moderation, cross-verification and double marking. These are vital quality processes that ensure examination marking is accurate, repeatable and free of any bias. AQBs must review, in some cases, double mark examinations. This will require the access to a second examiner in that method, sector and technique, something that is not easy to accommodate given the previously mentioned duties of the staff involved. These examinations are selected at random, so if you inquire about your examination results and are informed that it is being double marked, this is simply for quality and not something to be concerned about. Next, let's look at why PCN are also permitted a 28-day turnaround. As previously mentioned, there are currently 54 centres approved to provide examinations, with 22 of those being AQBs who provide PCN with results notices. This works out to be roughly 1,000 results notices a month passing through the Certification Records Department. This does not account for the large numbers of CP16 renewals and PSL57C applications that are also handled by CRD, with these often require a great deal more scrutiny than the AQB provided results notices, all of which must be handled in date order to ensure there is no bias between candidates or centres. Beyond this, the reasonably small, hard-working team also have many other functions to fulfil on behalf of BINDT. That being said, the team are usually able to keep up with the throughput, but as is common in the industry, there are periods throughout the year where uptake on certification sees a surge, inherently creating an occasional delay. In an attempt to give a clearer indication of this department's effort, I've added an organogram, which I appreciate may be hard to read if you're viewing this on a small screen. The actual text that's presented here isn't that essential. However, the area ringed in red relates to the Certification Records Department, who handle all of these processes. which in the larger picture of the Institute's responsibilities is a vital, hard-working but still small team within the organisation. Next, we will look at some key areas around PCN24 documents that exhibited change in relation to the previous legacy documents. One key change is that training and experience hours have now been converted to days. This is a direct result of the same changes being made to PCN ISO 9712. This table simply shows changes from the legacy system to the PCN24 system in accordance with ISO 9712. Each day is considered to be 7 hours of tuition. When we take the 1 day of 7 hours into account, this is what we get. Some courses have increased while some have decreased. When we look at the red level 2 and level 3 columns in the centre and on the right of the table, once these days are converted back to hours, there is little difference. UT appears to have taken the hardest hit with a 16-hour increase to level 1 and a net 6-hour increase at level 2. Despite these increases to the ISO minimum training requirements, there is some good news, however. Although these minimums are based upon a 7-hour day of tuition, the standard does allow for up to 8 hours of training to be conducted per day, with an additional provision for 2 hours of homework. Together, these should mitigate any potential for an increase in total course duration. For example, where MT Level 2 is noted as 5 7-hour days, this may set off alarm bells with candidates assuming they will need to return the following week for their examination. However, 5 7-hour days equates to 35 hours of tuition, but the standard goes on to permit 8 hours of classroom training plus 2 hours of homework per day, maintaining the ability for centres to facilitate this course in 4 days with the examination on a Friday. Next, we're on to experience requirements, which have also moved to days rather than months. Just like with training, these days are taken to be 7 hours a day. This may present more headache than the change in training. Importantly, candidates must allow for this conversion when submitting experience. BINDT staff and AQB staff who review your submitted experience, if in any other format than days, will have to convert the experience using set factors. These are: 1 month is considered to be 4 weeks, 1 week is considered to be 5 days, 1 day is considered to be 7 hours. So this does not account for 5-week months or 12-hour shifts. I would suggest that when completing experience logs that you convert your experience into hours and then divide them by 7 to arrive at the corresponding number of days. I must emphasise that this is in line with ISO 9712 and not something BINDT have opted to change on a whim. Here we have the table consisting of the legacy requirements. And in this one, here we have the PCN24 requirements in alignment with the current ISO 9712 standard. Most important to aspiring certification holders is this column I've added to the right. Here we can see a substantial drop in the total experience requirement across the board. I'm unaware of the reasoning behind this reduction, but while the completing of the forms has perhaps gotten a little more complex, the requirement has actually reduced. Many will be pleased to know that the new revision of ISO 9712 has separated the Level 2 instruction writing element from the physical testing of the part of the examination. As this is now clearly separated, the failing of one or more specimens will not necessitate you having to complete another instruction upon resitting the practical examination, providing that the instruction was passed on the first attempt. PCN documentation has shifted from 1 hour to 2 hours to complete the instruction writing, which is particularly advantageous if resitting the instruction writing alone, as you would be unable to borrow time from the practical testing element if you were to exceed the 1 hour permitted under the legacy system. Next up is a considerable change to the RI and RT examinations. For RI and RT initial candidates, the total number of radiographs has dropped from 12 radiographs to 10. However, those attempting recertification examinations will now face 10 radiographs rather than the 4 of the legacy system, which is a substantial hike in requirements. This again is a change driven by changes to ISO 9712, for which the PCN scheme must adhere whether we like it or not. Following queries on the PSL30 document, here I will attempt to provide some clarity on its completion. The document is split into two forms for completion. Form 1 providing the ultimate sign-off, and Form 2 being the comprehensive experience log. In an effort to work through the forms in the order they would normally be completed, we will look into the Form 2 first. This information will be focused around the actual log entries. First up, we must consider what the purpose of this log is. The initial purpose is for aspiring technicians to maintain track of their experience and details sufficient for their supervisor to provide their approval. But if the supervisor's certified, why would BINDT need to review it and possibly reject it? The answer for this is twofold. Firstly, it's unfortunate but true that not everybody in our industry is as honest and quality conscientious as we would expect them to be. As a consequence, the detail in forms such as these must be scrutinised in an effort to expose any effort to falsify certification eligibility, for which I can sadly say there have been a few cases for further investigation. These are few and far between. However, the Institute must remain diligent in respect to the issuing of its PCN certification that could otherwise result in the wrong people testing safety critical structures that we all rely upon. Secondly, but also tied to the first, is in maintaining BINDT's own accreditation. BINDT is accredited as a certification provider in accordance with BSEN ISO 17024. To maintain this status, BINDT is subjected to a comprehensive audit from the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, during which the Institute and its staff are assessed on their diligence in reviewing these forms. To lower our oversight could ultimately jeopardise our own accreditation, creating a risk to the continuance of the PCN scheme as a whole. Now that we've covered why this is important, let's look at what's actually needed. Here we have the details of the technique, codes, procedures, or standards. If I was simply to put UT of a weld in accordance with procedure UT001, this is perhaps a little vague, and the procedure reference means nothing to personnel external to the business. Try to elaborate more on the actual UT technique used, and where a procedure is used, add the overarching standard or standards that the procedure complies with. The next section is similar to the first, in that the most common cause for rejection is insufficient detail. Rather than simply stating weld or butt weld, add the service condition, add the material type, and the nominal thickness. Any little extra bits of information in there would be really useful. BINDT may also follow up for additional detail in support of what is claimed. Like with the exam moderation, this tends to be for quality purposes, demonstrating our own diligence. That being said, it is therefore highly beneficial to add an element of traceability in the form of a job number or similar, rather than be on the spot and have no idea what the actual product was when asked. In light of the changes to ISO 9712, moving experience from months to days, this part is very important. In this example, 10 days is fine as far as the log is concerned, but have you done more than that? If this was in fact 10 12-hour days, you would be selling yourself short, as this equates to 120 hours. When we divide that by 7 hours per day previously mentioned, you could actually be claiming 17 days worth of experience accrued in a 10-day period. I'll give another example of this later. Here, the supervising referee's full name should be given, along with the relevant certification number, in order for our staff and examination personnel to verify that this person is certified to the appropriate level, in the appropriate method and product sector, to enable them to act as a suitable supervisor during the acquiring of the experience. Here we have an example of what not to do. This example would certainly be rejected. At your leisure, please pause the video if you would like to read through my reasoning. However, it's quite clear that this entry is vague and exhibits minimal effort in completing an important step towards achieving certification. This is actually a draft example to be included in future revision of PSL30. Accompanying the incorrect example in the future revision of PSL30 will be this correct example. It is immediately apparent that the person is quality conscientious and is diligent in their provision of information. I would surmise that it takes very little time and effort to produce this level of detail in comparison to the incorrect example. Again, if you wish, please pause the video to review the entries. Comparison of the two also provides a good example of where experience durations may be inaccurate if not converted. The incorrect example over a 4-month period would have been credited with 80 days only when we convert it. In comparison to this breakdown, that would merit 134 days with the additional information. Here we return to Form 1 to provide a summary of the experience detailed in Form 2. Note that the total here must be in days. If you've completed Form 2 in hours, weeks, or months, this must be converted by you. As a quality check, certification or examination staff may also total up the experience of Form 2 for comparison with the figures in Form 1. If on Form 2 you have quoted months, as in the incorrect example, but have adjusted for the longer days, 5-week months, or working weekends, you must expand upon this in Form 2. If not, those reviewing it may come to a very different figure. At which point the application will likely be declined and the additional clarification required on the Form 2 will also need to be reassessed by the supervising referee, which is an inconvenience to all involved. In this section, details regarding the referee must be entered. The referee must be certified to the same level or higher than that being applied for, and must have held this certification over the period that the experience was gained, though this certification need not be specific to PCN. If you are the first person at your organisation to pursue PCN certification, please get in touch with us for information on how this may be achieved. Final section is for the employer to verify that you are indeed an employee and that they attest to the accuracy of the information provided. The next query is around the examination part F, which is the Level 3 procedure writing. PCN24 Gen notes 2 different ways in which this can be completed. These are the writing of a procedure, for which 6 hours is now permitted versus the tighter 4 hours of the legacy system. The other method is to complete critical analysis of an existing procedure, highlighted here in green text. The query from the Practitioner Committee is regarding how this critical analysis is facilitated. In short, it isn't. This critical analysis option is laid out in ISO 9712 and as such has found its way into the PCN GEN. However, no AQB currently offers this, and I will offer a couple of reasons for why this isn't used. AQBs wishing to offer this would need to produce multiple procedures for every method, product sector and technique on offer. To have a single one for each would not work, as candidates would soon become familiar with the examination content. Examination consistency would also be difficult to achieve, as procedural errors would need to vary between the procedures, which would most likely result in varied levels of difficulty between candidates. Tied into this is the question of how you would grade such analysis. Must the candidate locate every error? Are all errors graded equally? Or are major errors considered mandatory for success and others may be omitted? The difficulty of this task is also occasionally overlooked. On face value, reading a 20 to 30 page document seems preferable over writing one. But when reading technical documents of this length and complexity, it's easy to become lost in the text and find small but significant errors can be very difficult and stressful. With these things in mind, and the fact that no PCN centre offers such an examination, I believe this will be removed from future issues of PCN GEN. Here we have a quick look into why the D distinction grade has been removed. The distinction grade was intended as a transitional arrangement during the transition of the composite grade from 80% down to 70%. During this period of transition, the distinction grade was brought in to acknowledge those that had achieved the more difficult 80% composite. As the 70% has been the norm for a while now, there is no reason to continue this differentiation. The D grade is also a little inconsistent, as can be seen at the bottom of this slide. An initial level 1 or 2 examination is affected by theory, which in this case has pulled the 98% practical down to a 79% composite grade, losing the distinction. However, a recertification has no theory element, so in this case a practical of 80% alone qualifies for the distinction, despite it being 18% lower than the initial candidates. Removing the D removes this disparity. The final query relates to what supplementary examinations are and how they work. This has particular relevance to UT, hence I'm using UT in this explanation. At the bottom of this slide are 5 categories within UT welds. The order of these is significant, where 3.1 plate is considered to be the easiest and 3.9 node the hardest. In its simplest form, a supplementary examination is the addition of one or more of these categories to an existing certificate that already notes one or more of these categories. Where this becomes a little more interesting is when we add a category of a higher difficulty. For example, if we were to add a 3.8 nozzle supplementary to an existing 3.2 pipe certificate. In this case, the supplementary 3.8 examination can also renew the existing 3.2 certification without the need to complete the physical 3.2 recertification examination. This only applies when the supplemented technique is considered more advanced than the existing technique. In this example, if the candidate is successful in their 3.8 supplementary examination, their existing 3.2 certification will be renewed, with both certificates expiring on the same date. If it's a later date, the technician wished to add a 3.9 node category, this would renew both the 3.2 and 3.8 they already hold, being that it's considered to be of a higher category. In order to renew existing certification in this way, the supplementary examinations must be attempted while at least 6 months of validity remains on the certificate to be supplemented, which often attracts the question, why? The answer to which is to protect the candidate's existing certification. In this slide, I've attempted to highlight this reasoning. If the supplementary is attempted 6 months prior to the expiry of the existing lower categories, one additional attempt of the supplementary is permitted. If the second attempt is also failed, conventional recertification of the existing certificate will be necessary, for which 2 further resets are permitted. As can be seen in this table, allowing for 6 months of remaining certification allows for the worst case scenario. This does take into account the AQB's maximum permitted turnaround of 28 days. However, it does not take into account the examination availability at your selected centre, for which you may experience a slight delay. With this in mind, BINDT have established 6 months as the cut-off for supplementary examinations in order to avoid technicians losing certification due to time constraints. And with that, we're done. Thank you very much for taking the time to view this presentation. And if you would like to participate on the practitioner committee, please do get in touch. Thank you.